This was a criminal case that once shocked the entire United States. A pregnant mother and her 2 young daughters vanished into thin air overnight. After the incident, police mobilized in full force, but could not find them. Just when everyone was at a loss, a seemingly insignificant detail uncovered a chilling truth. The judge who presided over the case later remarked, "I've never seen anything like this before. This is perhaps the most inhumane and vicious criminal act among the thousands of cases I have handled." So what exactly happened back then? Let's travel back to 2018 and review this sensational case that captivated the nation. Frederick is an ordinary town in Colorado, USA. It originally produced coal, attracting many immigrants to settle there. But after the mine closed in 1928, the town gradually declined until it began to show some signs of recovery in recent years. According to the 2020 census, the town had a population of 14,513, an increase of 67.22% from 2010. This quiet, ordinary town first became known to the public through the story of our protagonist, Shannon. She had a caring husband, 2 adorable daughters, and a thriving career and family, the envy of many. In the early morning of the 13th of August, 2018, Shannon, who was 15 weeks pregnant, had just returned from a business trip. Her best friend Nicole drove her home. Before leaving, Nicole reminded her, "Don't forget your prenatal checkup at noon." But strangely, by daytime, Shannon seemed to have vanished. She didn't respond to messages or calls, and she missed her scheduled doctor's appointment at 12:10 p.m. Nicole felt she couldn't wait any longer. Worried, she took her son and went to Shannon's house. The house was located at 2825 Saratoga Trail, a spacious 5-bedroom home. When Nicole arrived under the blazing sun, she saw Shannon's car still parked in the driveway, meaning she likely hadn't gone far. But oddly, all the doors and windows were shut tight. No one answered her knocks or calls. She checked the doors and windows. They were intact, with no signs of forced entry. Peering through the windows, she saw no trace of Shannon or the 2 children. At this point, things started to feel wrong. Puzzled, Nicole immediately called Chris Watts, Shannon's husband, and an operator at Anadarko Petroleum Company, who worked early mornings and returned late. He said he didn't know anything either, explaining that when he left for work around 5 a.m., his wife and kids were still asleep. Upon hearing that his wife was missing, Watts rushed home. While waiting for him, Nicole called the police. At 1:40 p.m., an officer arrived to investigate, and Watts came back in a fluster. He unlocked the door and invited everyone inside. The house was empty. Doors and windows were intact, with no signs of damage or disturbance. The only unusual thing was that the bed sheets were missing from the bed. Watts suggested that his wife had probably taken the kids out to play and might be back soon, but a closer check revealed that Shannon's wallet, phone, and daily medications were still there. Highly unusual in this day and age. Who goes out without a wallet and phone? Moreover, Shannon was a brand promoter for a nutrition company and needed to stay in constant contact with clients. Unless there was a special reason, her phone was always with her. Things were getting stranger. Police turned their attention to Watts and asked, "Did your wife say anything before you left for work this morning?" Watts replied that when he got home around 2 a.m., Shannon was asleep. He woke up at 4 a.m. because they needed to discuss separation. They then had a friendly talk. Recently, there had been some friction in their relationship, and both were in a bad mood. To lighten the mood, Shannon said she would take the kids to a friend's house that day, but she didn't specify which friend. Around 5:30 a.m., he left for work. He tried calling her midway but got no answer. He figured she was still upset, so he didn't think much of it. After that, he didn't know what happened. Watts' story sounded plausible: marital issues, Shannon going to a friend's place in anger, and accidentally leaving her phone behind. It all seemed to make sense. Police collected surveillance footage from nearby streets and neighbors to see when Shannon had left. Strangely, however, no camera captured Shannon or the children at all. The only footage showed Watts backing his car into the garage at 5:27 a.m. and leaving at 5:45 a.m., nothing else. In other words, Shannon and the kids never left the house. They seemed to have vanished into thin air. Police asked neighbors if they had noticed the Shannon family, but everyone said no. As night fell, a full day had passed with still no leads. The news of Shannon and her children mysteriously disappearing from their home spread quickly through the town. Residents buzzed with speculation, some even suggesting supernatural forces were at play, casting a shadow of unease and fear over the entire community. To avoid panic, on the second day after the disappearance, the FBI and Colorado State Police jointly deployed over a dozen officers to Watts' home, along with trained search dogs for a thorough inside-Fayhan, Fay-out search. Unfortunately, the dogs couldn't track the three either. Throughout the investigation, Watts cooperated fully and even gave a television interview.
I've never seen something like this in my lifetime unless it was on TV or a movie, and this doesn't seem real at all. It just seems like I'm living in a nightmare and I can't get out of it. I just want them home so bad. I was hoping that I would just ran over by the kids running in the door and just like barrel rushing me, but it didn't happen. And it was just a traumatic night trying to be here. Shanann, Bella, Celeste, if you're out there, just come back. Like, if somebody has her, just please bring her back. I need to see everybody. I need to see everybody again. This house is not complete without anybody here. Please bring her back.
In the interview, Watts expressed his hope that his wife and children would return safely. He suspected they had been abducted and pleaded with the kidnappers to let them go. Listening to Watts' heartbreaking words, everyone sympathized with him. Police took the case very seriously, expanding the search area, deploying more personnel, and posting missing Fay person flyers everywhere. But still, nothing came of it. This bizarre disappearance case, fueled by media exposure, was no longer confined to the small town. It caused a huge stir across the US and even worldwide, becoming a hot topic of conversation everywhere. Countless people waited anxiously, hoping Shanann and her children would come home safely. The pressure on police was immense. To solve the case quickly, they decided to investigate Shannon's personal background. Shannon was born on the 10th of January 1984 in New Jersey and later moved with her family to North Carolina. She was as pretty as a doll, with bright eyes that could warm anyone's heart. Her parents always said she was a gift from God, but fate was not kind to this beautiful girl. At age 25, Shannon was diagnosed with lupus, an incurable chronic disease. Adding to her misfortune, she also suffered a serious car accident that same year, which worsened her condition. Just when she was nearly in despair, she met Chris Watts online. They chatted frequently and quickly became soulmates. It could be said that Watts helped her walk out of the darkest period of her life. Shannon regained her confidence, fought bravely against the disease, and gradually recovered. On the 3rd of November 2012, the loving couple tied the knot. After marriage, they moved to Frederick, Colorado, and bought a 5-bedroom house. On the 17th of December 2013, their first daughter, Bella, was born. On the 17th of July 2015, their second daughter, Celeste C.C., was born. The arrival of 2 daughters made Shanann even stronger, and the couple's relationship grew closer. She loved sharing her life online.
Oh, look at this. Oh, say hi to everybody.
Hi.
Cece, say hi, everybody.
Everybody.
Hi, everybody.
And he's the best thing that has ever happened to me.
Despite the harmonious family life, they were not financially well off. In fact, they were struggling. Their combined annual income was about $90,000. Not a small amount, but it still couldn't cover their heavy living expenses. They had a monthly mortgage of $3,000 and a car loan of $600, along with a staggering $70,000 in credit card debt, student loans, and medical bills. In July 2014, they were sued for failing to pay HOA fees. Under tremendous pressure, on the 5th of June 2015, Watts filed for bankruptcy. At that time, their 2 bank cards had only $3 and $6 left, respectively. Despite the immense financial strain, Shannon's love for Watts remained as strong as ever. On the 11th of June 2018, the couple welcomed their 3rd child. Shannon was overjoyed and immediately shared the good news with Watts, who was also happy. They found out it was a boy and named their unborn son Nico. During the investigation, police learned that Shannon was outgoing and kind. Friends all described her as someone who loved life and her family. Therefore, the chances of her running away with the children were extremely low. So who had taken the mother and daughters away, and how did they evade the surveillance cameras? Paulus interviewed Shannon's friends and family, asking if she had shown any unusual behavior recently. Surprisingly, all of them brought up the same thing, that Shannon's marriage had been in serious trouble. In text messages to friends, Shannon complained that Watts didn't want the third child, and had even said they were no longer compatible, and should separate as soon as possible. In addition, Shannon's mother, Sandra, also said that while Watts had initially been a good father and husband with a great relationship, he seemed to have changed recently. On the 27th of June, when Shannon took the girls to North Carolina for vacation, Watts refused to accompany them, and only showed up 5 weeks later. One night, Shannon was vomiting all night due to pregnancy, but Watts acted cold and indifferent. Sandra found this very strange. He used to be so caring and gentle. She even told police she suspected Watts was behind her daughter and granddaughter's disappearance. Coincidentally, Watts's change began right after Shannon left for vacation. From then on, they barely spoke, gradually drifting apart. Even when they were together later, there was no kissing or hugging. They had become the most familiar strangers. Shannon grew increasingly anxious, constantly pouring out her pain to friends, and worrying that Watts had found another woman. And as it turned out, her fears were justified. Paulus discovered from Watts's communication records that he was indeed having an affair. The affair was with his co-worker, Nicole Kessinger. Watts had lied to Kessinger, claiming he was already divorced in order to pursue a relationship with her. Paulus also tracked Watts and his mistress Kessinger's movements during Shannon's vacation. On the 4th of July, Watts invited Kessinger to his home, and they had sex. On the 7th of July, they talked on the phone late into the night. On the 14th of July, they went on a date at the Shelby American Automobile Collection Museum and spent the night at a nearby hotel. On the 30th of July, before heading to North Carolina to reunite with Shannon, Watts wrote Kessinger a love letter. On the 4th of August, Kessinger bought a wedding dress online. On the 7th of August, Watts and Shannon returned home from vacation together. On the 9th of August, Shannon went on a business trip to Arizona. On the 11th, Watts hired a babysitter, left the kids with her, and went on another date with Kessinger. In reality, the two had been involved for quite some time. Watts's phone contained over 1,000 photos of Kessinger, many of them explicit, hidden using software. But police found them all. Watts juggled between his old flame and new love, a true master of time management. And that wasn't all. Paulus also discovered he had had a one night stand with another woman. Around February 2018, he met a woman named Amanda on a dating app. When police later interviewed Amanda, she described Watts as very rough and aggressive in bed. Police suspected Watts had cheated multiple times during his marriage. All signs pointed to the fact that he no longer loved his wife. A detective skilled in psychology carefully reviewed Watts's interview footage and pointed out several red flags. Throughout the interview, Watts appeared very nervous, with shifty eyes and arms crossed over his chest, a classic defensive posture. When talking about his wife and daughters, he habitually used the past tense, as if he was certain they would never return. In addition, Shannon's friend Nicole provided police with two suspicious details. First, on the day of the disappearance, when she wanted to call the police to track Shannon's whereabouts, Watts tried to stop her, saying he didn't want law enforcement involved. Second, while reviewing surveillance footage, Watts's behavior was particularly unnatural. Normally calm-tempered, he became visibly agitated when he saw the clip of himself backing his car into the garage. He paced back and forth in front of the screen, with his arms crossed, looking extremely anxious, as if some dark secret had been exposed. These details raised police's suspicions significantly. The neighbor who provided the surveillance footage to police also noted that he had never seen Watts back his car into the garage to load things before. This was the only time, and it was very unusual on the day of the incident. Before Nicole called the police, Watts was the only person who had entered or left the house. It was certainly possible that he had tampered with something. On the 15th of August, the third day after the disappearance, police brought Watts to the station for a formal interrogation. In the interrogation room, Watts sat in his chair with his legs crossed, looking relaxed and composed.
So I need to ask you about your marriage and infidelity.
Okay, tell me about it.
I have never cheated on my wife.
Okay.
And she's always been a trustworthy person. I've always been a trustworthy person. I fully expect if we ever thought about straying another way, that we would tell each other before it happened.
Throughout the interrogation, Watts' answers were almost flawless. He firmly denied having an affair and insisted he had done nothing to harm Shannon. If police hadn't already gathered some evidence, they might have believed him. FBI agents specializing in psychological analysis, after repeatedly watching the interrogation footage, noticed that Watts would subconsciously touch his neck. Whenever he talked about his wife and daughter's disappearance, based on this body language, the agents made a bold guess that Watts may have strangled Shannon. During the subsequent lie detector test, he remained calm. "Did you participate in the disappearance of Shannon and the children?" the examiner asked. "No," Watts replied. "Do you know where Shannon and the children are?" Number, did you have an argument or physical altercation with Shannon? Number, Watts answered confidently, but the polygraph score told a different story, -18, well below the normal threshold. When he learned he had failed the test, he became visibly agitated and distressed, his face contorted with pain and struggle, and he finally confessed. Through sobs, Watts explained, on the morning of the incident, he had asked for a separation, which made Sean very upset. They parted on bad terms. As he was walking downstairs, he suddenly heard the girls screaming. When he returned to the bedroom, he saw Shannon strangling both children until they stopped breathing. Enraged by what he saw, he lost control and choked Shannon to death. Because the garage was connected to the house, afterward, he backed his car into the garage, wrapped his wife and children's bodies in bed sheets, loaded them into the vehicle, and disposed of them near an oil field owned by his company. That was why Shannon and the children never appeared on any surveillance footage. The story sounded absurd. A pregnant mother who loved her family supposedly killed her own 2 daughters with her bare hands. It was preposterous, regardless of the truth. At least Watts had admitted to killing Shannon. Paulus used the GPS in Watts's car to locate the oil field about 100 kilometers from Shannon's house. They then flew a drone over the area to search and take photos, and indeed found the missing bed sheets from Watts's home. Police placed the drone photos in front of Watts and asked him to point out where he had hidden the bodies. He marked 3 spots, saying his wife and 2 children were there. Following that lead, police found the remains of Shannon and her 2 children in that desolate oil field. Shannon was buried in a shallow grave covered with a bedsheet. The 2 children had been stuffed into an oil tank with a very small opening. The medical examiner determined that all 3 had died of asphyxiation. Shannon's neck showed obvious bruising, her hyoid bone was fractured, and there was a tear nearly 4 centimeters long inside her mouth. Bella had a noticeable injury on her left buttock, and a strand of blonde hair was found on one of the oil tanks, caused by Watts forcing her into the tank. This showed that Watts handled the remains with extreme brutality. After seeing the gruesome state of Shannon and the children, Officer Tammy was almost certain that Watts had killed them. If it had been a crime of passion, he wouldn't have brutally shoved 2 innocent children into an oil tank. That was not something a father would do. Subsequently, police charged Watts with 3 counts of first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and other offenses. On the 16th of August 2018, the first hearing in the Watts murder case was held in Weld County, Colorado. The atmosphere in the courtroom was somber. Shannon's father delivered an emotional statement. The judge noted that due to the severity of the case, and for the sake of public safety, Watts would not be granted bail. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the accusations from the victims' relatives, Watts still refused to plead guilty, insisting that Shannon had killed the 2 children. At a second hearing on the 21st of August 2018, he entered a not-guilty plea to all charges to secure Watts's confession. Shannon's family agreed not to pursue the death penalty. They had already lost 4 lives. On the 6th of November 2018, Watts reached a plea agreement with prosecutors, admitting to killing his wife Shannon and their 2 daughters. In exchange, the death penalty was taken off the table. Regarding the severity of the case, the presiding judge stated, "The defendant coldly and deliberately ended 4 lives. This was not impulsive, nor was it an accident. It was carefully planned and repulsive behavior. I've never seen anything like this before. This is perhaps the most inhumane and vicious criminal act among the thousands of cases I have handled." In the end, Watts was sentenced to 5 life sentences, plus 48 years for unlawful termination of pregnancy, and 36 years for 3 counts of tampering with evidence. A total of 84 years. Although he escaped the death penalty, he would never leave prison alive. After learning of the sentencing, Shannon's father said to Watts,
"Shannon, Bella, and Nico, love and caring people. They love life. They love being around people who love them. But God only knows what happened that night. Life will never be the same without Shannon, Bella, and Celeste and Nico. They were taken by a heartless one. This is the heartless one, the evil monster, who dare you take the lives of my daughter Shannon, Bella, Celeste, and Nico. I trusted you to take care of them, not kill them. And they also trusted you. The heartless monster, and then you take them out like trash. You disgust me. Let me tell you something, I will think of them every day of my life, and I love them every day of my life. Prison is too good for you. This is hard to say, but may God have mercy on your soul. I hope you enjoy your new life. It's nothing like the one you had out here. May the courts have no mercy on you."
As for the motive, because Watts refused to explain, we may never know for certain. But based on the clues gathered, it appears he simply wanted to shed his family obligations and live freely with his mistress. Just when everyone thought the case would slowly fade from public attention after the trial, something unexpected happened. In September 2019, a book titled The Tragic Confession of the Watts Family Murders brought some long-buried truths back into the spotlight. The book's author, Chair Cadle, had corresponded with Watts and compiled the letters he wrote from prison into a book. In those letters, Watts revealed details of the case that even police hadn't known. His actions had been premeditated, and they were utterly horrifying. According to the letters, here is what actually happened. On the morning of the 13th of August, before discussing separation with Shannon, he first went to his daughter's room and tried to smother them with a pillow. Miraculously, both girls woke up. He was in the middle of a fierce argument with Shannon when he choked her to death. When the girls woke up and asked what happened, Watts told them, "Mommy is sick." He then took them all in the car to the oil field. By then, Shannon's body was already at the children's feet. The poor girls were too young to understand that their mother was already dead and that they were next. Upon arriving at the oil field, Watts first suffocated little C.E. Bella watched everything. She asked her father through tears, "Am I going to be like C.E.?" Watts didn't answer, and then he brutally killed his eldest daughter. The little girl's last words were heartbreaking, "No, Daddy." In addition, he confessed in the letters that he had once tried to poison Shannon, hoping to make her miscarry. His sole purpose in all of this was to rid himself of his family and marry his mistress, Kessinger. Reading all of this, I am sure many of you can't help but feel a surge of anger. Just thinking about it sends chills down your spine. It also corroborates the police's speculation about the motive. Marriages fail all the time these days. If you can't get along, just get a divorce. Why choose such an extreme path? Even a tiger won't eat its own cubs. This is the darkest side of human nature at its worst. Watts's cold, fey-blooded cruelty is chilling. What must he have been thinking as he watched his daughters slip away in his hands? In the dead of night, does he hear the tearful accusations of his wife and children? But that doesn't matter anymore. Lonely prison bars and a lifetime of shackles are his proper fate. His remaining years will slowly waste away in regret and isolation. Perhaps that is the most fitting punishment for him. Incredibly, Watts has received numerous love letters in prison. Several women have written to him expressing their affection, even sending bikini photos. Some have said Watts has one of the kindest faces they've ever seen. Others called him a good man, and some said they were deeply attracted to him. It is utterly baffling. Actually, this isn't all that uncommon. In cases we've covered before, like the Scott Peterson case and the Devil's Disciple Richard Ramirez case, Both received massive amounts of love letters from women, and some even got married behind bars. The Watts family tragedy has since been adapted into multiple films and television productions, including the Netflix documentary The Watts Murders, The Neighbor Next Door, which premiered on the 30th of September 2020. The documentary used extensive real footage and materials to recreate the entire case and reveal the deep faces